Hello, have another book review for you today. This time, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. Who would this book be of interest to? I think historians primarily would be interested to read this book, but it would also be useful for economists as well. The author Charles Mackay wrote this in around 1840. The language is quite old. It's also written in a tabloid style, so he does tend to romanticise a little bit, exaggerate what was going on in these various periods. So what he does in this book, he talks about a number of manias, what he calls periods of madness. So he talks about the Mississippi scheme. This occurred in France. There was a man from Scotland actually who went to Paris, and he persuaded their equivalent of the Chancellor, who was in charge of the country's finance, to issue a paper currency. And this worked out really well in the short term, but it did eventually precipitate a huge crash and the printing of lots of notes, lots of paper, to the extent that the currency lost a tremendous amount of value. People didn't want it, they didn't believe in it, and this caused a crash. And he was temporarily very popular, John Law, when he went over there, but he was a very much a wanted man by the end of this period, in which people lost all sense of rationality. And this is what happened in the early 18th century. He then talks about the South Sea bubble. So around 20 years later, something similar happened in London. And interestingly, Sir Isaac Newton famously lost quite a lot of money. I think the equivalent of a few £1 million in today's money in this stock market bubble. So people were investing in the South Sea company. And once again, the value of those shares kept on increasing, and people seeing the price go up and forgetting about, is there a business there? What am I actually buying shares in? Is this a profitable company? What's the underlying business? People just sort of lost all sense of logic and rational thinking, and they sort of get caught up in these moments of madness and speculation and greed. People want to believe that the share price is going to keep going up, and so they believe that it will keep going up, and they become deluded. They believe things which simply aren't true, and the reality changes, and that causes the bubble to burst and huge political and economic ramifications. He talks about tulip mania as well, which occurred in Amsterdam. This is quite a famous case of the Dutch. First of all, it started off as the aristocrats in Amsterdam buying tulip bulbs. So tulips actually come from Central Asia. They were quite popular in Turkey, and the rich people in Holland started to buy them. One of the reasons why they liked them is because they take a long time to grow. They look a bit like onions, actually. And there's an interesting story in this book of a man who mistakes one of these tulip bulbs, which in today's money, cost millions of pounds, because the price of these tulip bulbs went up spectacularly to the point where people were selling their houses to buy them, and they were worth 4 or 5 times the average house value at the time. So it became a speculative mania. But somebody mistook one of these tulip bulbs for an onion, and when the person realised this, the person who bought the bulb, he realised, where's the bulb gone? He realised somebody must have accidentally taken it, and he ran down the street, and he found the man, eating this tulip bulb, thinking it was an onion, literally eating thousands of pounds worth of his money, really, which he paid for this tulip bulb. Once again, the rich started off as buying these bulbs. There was actually a virus. So what happened was the tulip bulbs became infected with various viruses, and that caused them to change colour and have interesting patterns. So sometimes you'll see like red and black swirly patterns on these tulip flowers, which are very pretty. It's actually due to a virus infection that they get. They didn't know that at the time, but that was part of their appeal, was their aesthetic beauty. But noticing that the price kept on going up, it dragged in the middle class and even people possibly from lower down the social hierarchy, and that's what kept on pushing the prices higher and higher and higher. And it caused a big problem because when the prices started to dip, people suddenly lost confidence, they lost faith in tulips, and lots of contracts at this point, at the height of the mania, were wrote in tulips, and they simply couldn't be honoured because the tulips were worthless. So somebody may have said, you know, I agreed to pay, you know, 10 specific tulip bulbs for this house or for such and such. But when those tulips became meaningless, obviously the person who agreed to that contract didn't want to honour that contract, didn't want to keep the contract. And so it became quite a serious problem in the Netherlands. It's quite interesting to read. Good thing about this book is that although it is quite romantic and does tend to exaggerate a little bit, particularly the impact of some of these events. I was watching some videos a few days ago from people who have tried to objectively analyse, you know, what happened and the full extent and the severity of the impact of these crashes and these manias. And actually, a number of historians have said, well, it wasn't quite as bad as has been believed. And actually, the economies of these countries, England, France, Holland, they recovered pretty quickly, and it didn't have too much of an impact, you know, beyond a 3 or 4 year time horizon. These countries got over it quite quickly, and things moved on. Perhaps it's similar to, you know, the dot-com bubble in the mid to late 1990s. We had a dot-com bubble, people in the US, people from different parts of the world buying internet stocks because the internet was quite a new thing then, and people became quite speculative. They weren't really looking at the underlying business. They put almost blind faith in these companies eventually becoming profitable because of the newness of this technology and the fashion, and people got kind of hyped up into this frenzy where they were paying ridiculous prices for stocks, for companies that weren't even profitable, but only, you know, had the possibility of becoming profitable in the years ahead. People believed it, people wanted to believe it, and so, you know, with the dot-com bubble you see crazy share price, and it falls down very quickly. Some have suggested that led to the housing bubble bursting in 2007, around 10 years later, because people took their money out of the stock market because of the dot-com bubble. They lost faith and confidence in stocks more generally, and they took that money and put it in something more solid, into housing, and that led to the housing bubble, which burst in 2008, leading to the period which we have just gone through the last 14 years in the UK. We've had austerity measures in the shadow of the 2008 housing bubble crash. The housing bubble crash precipitated a financial crisis, and in response to that, in the UK, other countries responded differently. We had austerity measures, and so they had these things do have noticeable impacts on everyday people's lives. It's not just stuff in textbooks. These speculative bubbles affect real people in the real world. In the book, it's not all about economics. He does talk about alchemy and how for hundreds of years, alchemists, in trying to find the philosopher's stone, pretty much wasted their entire lives. You know, people believed that there was a philosopher's stone in existence which could give them eternal life, make them live forever, turn things into gold. People believed that, and so they spent their entire lives looking for these stones, and it was a delusion, it didn't really exist, and many people just wasted their whole lives on this stuff. And then he talks about a number of other delusions. I'm not going to go through them all, I'll just tell you what they are. So, modern prophecies, fortune telling, the magnetizers, influence of politics and religion on the hair and beard, the crusades, he goes into the crusades quite a bit, the witch mania, the slow poisoners, haunted houses, popular follies of great cities, popular admiration of great thieves, jewels and ordeals, relics. So this book is a collection of stories about historical events, manias throughout history. That's what this author is talking about in this book. Why might it be valuable? Well, it's interesting to see that humans are always vulnerable to folly and to irrationality. Carl Jung famously said the human psyche hangs by a thread. He was talking about what happened in the 20th century regarding the Second World War and what was taking place in Germany in the 1930s and 1940s. People, doing all sorts of crazy things, and these moments of madness can be incredibly destructive. And we tend to think of bubbles in the stock market as being something new, but actually it goes way back, and bubbles existed way back in the early 19th century. So it's an interesting book. It's called The Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, and it's by Charles Mackay. Thank you very much.